Hello, and welcome to Robotics in Retail with Rethink Retail. Retail technology today, it's about so much more than self-checkout or AI. It's about bringing the benefits of technology into the retail world and merging online and offline into a retail environment, enhancing customer and staff experience, boosting efficiency, and of course, driving sales. That's the transformative potential of robotics today. But robotics are not a one size fits all, and how they benefit retailers is going to vary significantly depending on each retailer's workflow, capabilities, culture, and so much more. And so I am so excited that we're going to be diving into this topic today with a discussion on what robotics can mean for retailers and where it's all heading. And I'm thrilled to be joined by these two illustrious top retail experts. We have Guy Korten, VP of Industry and Advanced Technology for Texas, and Oliver Banks, Retail Transformation Leader and founder of OB & Company, and author of recently released book, Driving Retail Transformation. Welcome, gentlemen.
Dan, thanks for having us. I'm really looking forward to this.
Well, absolutely, 100%. It's just going to be a fantastic conversation.
Right. Yeah. We have our QR codes here if anyone wants to hook up with us on LinkedIn and check out our profiles and ping us for a conversation. We'd love to talk about this more. We're all very passionate about the subject of retail and robotics and all things technology. And so to dive right in, let's start by taking a look at the space. And Oliver, do you want to start by just touching briefly on what we've put together here as far as players in the robotics space?
Absolutely. So the robotics technology space is so hot right now, and there are so many different companies that are innovating and driving the industry forwards. And what we've got here is a look at who are these companies, who are these innovators, these drivers. And so we'll just touch on these three categories that we've split out into deliveries, into in-store, into warehouse. So just starting on the delivery section very quickly, what we're talking about here is all sorts of movement between buildings, between nodes in the supply chain, and of course, the final mile to the customer as well. So we're thinking about things like self-driving trucks and vehicles, autonomous pods that are rolling along sidewalks and pavements, and of course drones flying through the sky as well. Lots of different innovations here, really broad and exciting space.
And as far as in-store goes, I am so excited about the application of robotics in this space because it's relatively new and the possibilities are almost endless. So in the past, robotics have really been confined to a highly functional stock inventory function. Today, they're starting to move into customer-facing roles to engage with the customer, to supplement human staff, or even in some cases, I don't want to say replace human staff, but to do things that humans have not been able to do, or to free humans up to do the more complex tasks. And things like applying eyelashes, painting your nails, showing people where products are, and engaging with them directly and telling jokes, passing out product samples. These are all really interesting aspects of robotics that are just starting to get a foothold in the physical store.
Yeah, and finally around the warehouse. And I think that's where, to some degree, if we look at these three big buckets of automation, the warehouse is the place where it's sort of the grandfather of automation in the retail space. Why? Because we've seen robotics within the warehouse for a lot longer than we've seen in delivery and in-store. But even from that perspective, it's still a fairly new industry. If we go back to sort of what I would call the dawn of the modern automation in the warehouse, which is really the acquisition of Kiva Systems by Amazon, that was back in 2004. That's 20 years ago now. But most of these robotic players that you see here on this list, they're all still in their teenage years. Most of them probably are just about old enough to drive a car themselves, and they certainly can't go out here in the US and buy themselves a drink somewhere. But what's fascinating, and sort of building on what Deanne was saying within the store, a lot of these robots and the robotic solutions we're seeing in the warehouse is to do what? Supplement labor. So to make up for labor shortages, to complement labor, to do things that labor can't or won't want to do, and really to make the warehouse much more efficient. I know we're going to get into this, but it's really about how do we convert or turn the warehouse into much more of what it is going to be or is today, as opposed to the traditional sort of linear way of looking at warehouse, which is just a storage drop-off area for inventory. So I'm really excited to talk about the three sections and especially looking at the warehouse side and all the things that we as consumers, we don't get to see because we're not out there in a warehouse seeing it. But trust me, there's a lot going on within those warehouses that is really fascinating.
Great. Well, on that note, let's just dive right in. And I'd like to start at a high level and ask both of you to talk a little bit about what you see as the biggest factors that have been holding retailers back from adopting a more widespread use of robotics. I mean, what do you see is changing now to help robotics move forward in the retail industry?
I'll start with that, Dan, and maybe I'll start from back from the warehouse moving out. I think we've seen a lot of warehouse adoption of robotics for retailers in large part because of COVID. COVID all of a sudden descended upon us, and it was, I hate to say a perfect storm, but it kind of was, right? E-commerce has been around now for a while, but e-commerce was really continuing to pick up steam. All of a sudden, COVID hit. All of a sudden, we as consumers couldn't go to stores. So what did we do? We went to our laptops, went to our phones, went to our tablets, did more e-commerce. Oh, by the way, we weren't allowed to go to grocery stores or to sports stores or to quilting stores, right? We weren't able to be consumers. So we were all stuck at home. We had worked from home. So all of a sudden now, we were looking to do more with our downtime, so to speak. We saw this too in the furniture business. All of a sudden, that project, my office, it's getting a little old, the desk and the chair, I'll put it off. But now all of a sudden I'm working from home and I notice it more. And you know what? I'm going to order that new desk chair. I'm going to order the new office furniture. I'm going to order a new couch, etc. So all of a sudden the strain being placed on the supply chain for retailers was jumped, right? Exponentially. And then a third part of this is, guess what? It was hard. It was always hard to find labor in the warehouse. But now because of COVID, we could find even less labor. People weren't leaving their homes. They weren't able to go into the warehouses. So all of a sudden now this rush to adopt robotics to make up for the shortage really took a major spike. And I think that's one of the big drivers that we're seeing. But you fast forward to today, and I think what we're seeing with retailers in particular is while there's a lot of promise in robotics, there's still a lot of questions too about how does it function within the warehouse? How does it function within the store? How does it function at last mile? So I think we've seen a lull, especially in warehousing, for last year in terms of robotic adoption for many reasons. I just looked at a study by Reuters that said, I think there was a 30% drop in units sold in warehouses last year across the board, not just retail. But I think retail certainly was one that took that. So to your question, Deanne, I think we saw a big uptake during the pandemic. I think that model was baked in and we thought we'd continue to see it. And now we're starting to see a little bit of a slowdown because a lot of economic factors, the interest rates, things of that nature. But I think also people being smarter about how they go out and purchase robots.
100% agree with you there, Guy. I think the other factor to consider as well is the technology development that has been going on over the past few years. Robots have existed actually for decades, but really we've seen some massive increases that have been able to be developed in the various labs and test cases. And then when COVID hit, as Guy correctly suggested, suddenly there is a true use case for this. So if we just think about that technology development, that's both in terms of capability, but also cost to make it financially viable, right? And then on top of that, you've got the data side, which cloud computing has really unlocked. All of these systems are hugely data hungry to really be able to optimize and perfect both in terms of efficiency, but also just doing the job, right? A robot moving across a warehouse, a busy road, whatever. That's a lot of data to crunch. And if we just step back and think about where robots have come from in a manufacturing environment where they've been sitting on a production line, let's say welding pieces of car together, it's the same weld that robot arm is making time and time and time again. The level of variation was incredibly low. So manufacturing naturally propelled forward and excelled. When you look at retail and variation, goodness gracious, it's enormous. You look at warehouses, the range of product sizes, types, packaging, weights, big. The range of movements needed to be able to replenish or to be able to pick or pack. Then when you look at in-store, variation goes through the roof as you add in the customer element, right? And of course, in our delivery category, we're out in the big wide world where, frankly, anything could happen. So we've really had to rely on this technology development to get to a place that can be smart enough and technically capable and financially viable to be able to deploy at a meaningful scale that we are starting to see now.
That's great. And kind of building on that, let's settle into the topic of warehouses for just a moment. And I'll turn this over to you, Guy. You talked a little bit about a slowdown. Do you think the topic of robots in the warehouse has cooled, or is there still an important need?
So I think there's sort of two ways to look at that question, Deanne. First, has the topic slowed down? Yes, I think it has. Partly because this little thing, and Oliver, you brought it up, but AI has sort of commanded sort of the top of fold when it comes to newsworthy and the buzz and what people want to talk about. But has the need slowed down? Absolutely not. The need only continues to grow. I think we haven't solved, and I will freely admit, I used to work at Forrester Research a long, long time ago and as an industry analyst. And I know we always have to come up with a fresh set of things to talk about, right? We can't talk about cloud computing for more than a year because we got to go into the next thing. We can't talk about robots for longer than a year to go to the next thing. So I think we're part of what we're suffering is that. But the need of robotics within the warehouse, we haven't solved for that issue. If you look at the biggest issues that we still have around labor, that has not gone away. Now, I know there's, here in the United States, right, we still have a very high employment rate. I think that continues to go. It's been surprising, but we continue to have that. If I look at where warehouses are physically, there's a lot of pressure, a lot of it coming from our friends at Amazon. Why? Because a lot of times Amazon is building new warehousing in those areas. And then they're absorbing a lot of the labor that's there, if there is any slack labor, and there really isn't. So those labor issues continue. I'll tell you some horror stories, but one of which is I remember hearing a story that one warehouse was literally seeing people quit at lunch. People go off to lunch, they'd see a better job offer on a billboard, and they just didn't come back. So all of a sudden now you're having this constant pressure. So I think that's one. That problem, that issue is not going away. The second one that ties into it where the need continues to be high, and I teased this out to begin with, is when we think, and Oliver, to your point, you're spot on with retail, right? Retail is constantly evolving. We're constantly moving and shifting, whether it's demand, whether it's goods, whether it's wants, whether it's needs, whether it's customization. And the challenge for that is the warehouse and the retail supply chain is being asked to do so much more than it was 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. We're seeing a lot more things like last mile kitting. So I'm going to customize a product at my warehouse before I dispatch it. So Deanne orders a sweater and wants something put on it, and Oliver orders the same sweater and wants it different. Well, it's the same base sweater, but I'm going to have to customize it at some point. I'm going to look to my warehouse as the last touch point before I send it out to you. I'm going to ingest returns, right? We know the returns business here in the United States. I heard the facsimile, if you took the amount of money in the returns channel, it's to be the second biggest retailer behind Walmart in the world, right? That's how much money is in returns. But the warehouse is being asked now to ingest those returns. So what do I do with those? How do I check them? How do I know if they're for recycle, or I put them back away, or I refurbish them? So we're asking our warehouses in retail to do so much more, let alone picking, right? As I mentioned, let's say before our friends at Amazon came around, 25, 30 years ago, before e-commerce, the warehouse in retail was very simple. I manufactured, I moved, I stored it in my warehouse, and then when the store asked for it, I would dispatch maybe a pallet or maybe boxes. Now, I'm still doing that, but I'm also being asked to do what? Fulfill online orders in a fast, timely, efficient manner. So those have not gone away. And the robotic business, the robotic solutions are being turned to solve some of these issues. So the need, Dan, continues. I think the interest or the buzz, if you will, has diminished because it's been supplanted by AI and other technologies. But the demand continues to be high. And I think that's what I'm still seeing when I go out there and I meet with my customers and others and I visit their warehouse. Those issues are still there. Those needs are still there. I think one of the things that's slowing down is the buyer, I think, is getting savvier. So they're asking more questions. They're pushing the robotic vendors to provide more solutions. They're being smarter. Oliver mentioned this, right? They're saying, well, wait a minute. I'm picking shampoos and soaps today. Tomorrow I might be picking teddy bears and stuffed animals. And then in 3 weeks, I might be picking clothing. So is your robotic solution going to be able to be flexible enough to address all those needs that I might have? Oh, I might want your robot to do put away now. I might want to do X, Y, or Z. So I think that's part of it where the buyer's getting smarter. The needs continue to be there. They're not going away. And I think people are being more strategic in their investment in these robotic players. But the need's still there. We might not be reading it on the latest blog post or Reddit or what have you, but the need absolutely is still there. I think it will only continue to grow. And I think it's still very exciting for robotic vendors to figure out how they play. But I would also say for retailers, you still have the power when it comes to making a decision and to understand, but take your time, but also don't wait.
I think just to add on to that, you're absolutely right. We may not be reading about it all the time or hearing about all these new innovations, but they're happening, right? You look at the big retailers who really made headlines when they started deploying robotics in warehouses. And actually, those deployments are still ongoing. These mega retailers have got multiple sites, and it takes a lot of capital and a lot of time and effort to develop it, but it's happening behind the scenes. And I think the other point is, we have seen a slight drop off of e-commerce if you look at that as a percent of total retail share. And that has just eased back the need a little bit. So if you were right on the precipice of needing to go for an automation solution because of labor, because of space, all the points that Guy's absolutely well made, suddenly that has just eased off. So you've got a little bit more breathing room before you need to make the final decision.
Mm-hmm. Well, sorry, I would say one thing, Oliver, you're right, spot on. Like, all we have to do is look at, again, our friends at Amazon. A few months ago, they announced Sequoia, which is a massive robotic and automation investment on their part within their warehouses. So it's building upon their Kiva investment, but really now they've got humanoid robots offloading containers and things of that nature. They've got a whole host of robots they're going to be rolling out. Now, this will not be made available to the general public, meaning if I'm Target, I certainly can't go to Amazon and say, hey, I want to buy your Sequoia robotic system. But it's an indication that, the biggest e-commerce retailer out there, they're doubling down on robotics and they're building even more within their warehouse to automate. So it's beyond just, traditional sortation or Kiva goods to person. I mean, they're really putting a lot of money behind what they're saying. So to Oliver's point, these big retailers we're seeing, they recognize the importance of this and they're investing in it. My mom might not be reading about robots anymore because now she's reading about AI, but it's still there.
So integrating robotics into the warehouse, I've heard you talk about this in previous conversations about the need to integrate some types of robotics into the very infrastructure of a warehouse. What are some of the design considerations that you think these different types of robots or flavors of robots should be considered for a warehouse environment?
And I half joke, but that's the billion-dollar question. I think when you look at it, the integration, Oliver mentioned the constant change of retail. We talked about the different types of robotics. I think you've got a massive challenge here for any retailer to understand, yes, I might need a robot for picking. I might need a robot for put away. I may need a robot for, point to point, just moving pallets from one area to another. I might need robots to offload my trucks. Okay, fantastic. How do they all play together, right? Because now I'm asking all these robots to orchestrate, and not just them, but the labor. How do I manage all the labor inside? And I think it is, to me, Deanne, sort of the next big market that I see in the warehouse specifically, of how we're going to be able to play nice all together. And I will even push it further. I know the sections that we wrote, that you guys wrote on in the store and last mile. I think if you start looking out into the future, why wouldn't the robot that's delivering that for the last mile not be integrated to the robot that's picking the order in the warehouse or in the store? Because all of a sudden now I want to orchestrate all that. I want to know that I can pick my item that's going to Oliver's house and it's ready to be picked up by that last mile delivery on time. It's not just sitting somewhere for hours or days idly, because now I'm just moving the bottleneck somewhere else. The question, Deanne, is there's so many players trying to figure this out. I think there's so many challenges, because part of it is, as a robotic player, I don't necessarily want to have someone else control my robots. That's my secret sauce. So that's going to be one hurdle. The second hurdle, and I'm going to really date myself here, it's almost like VHS versus Betamax, right? What is the standard that we're going to write to control all this? There is no standard today. Some are trying, and I think there's efforts being made there. Like Boston Robotics Group has some things around standards, but a lot of those are around safety. So, okay, how to, if a Six River robot's going down an aisle and a Geek Plus robot's coming on the other way, how do they avoid each other? Basic stuff like this, which, Oliver, you mentioned being out in the wild, like those are hard enough in a warehouse that's basically a controlled environment. Now you put that going down Fifth Avenue and the problems become exponential. But yes, I think, Deanne, it is going to be a massive space. And Oliver mentioned it too, right? With more data, more real-time information, dare I say more AI, we should be able to start creeping towards a solution, but it's a challenge.
And I think, just to add into that, when you look at the solution space, you can see there are so many companies here, so many very clever people working on different solutions. So you could do all of it, but realistically, that's not going to be viable for your organization, right? So it's about understanding your current operating model and actually, where is there the greatest challenge? Where is there the greatest need to start to think about how to develop that? And this could be in your warehouse, or it could be in any other part of your operating model, by the way, because you need to think about your growth. You need to think about, your trade patterns, peaks and troughs through the year or over time, how your categories are going to expand, contract, evolve. And that all plays into the consideration of which solution am I going to choose, and ultimately, how are they going to connect, as we've just been speaking about.
Absolutely. So where would a retailer start if they want to start building out their roadmap, and thinking about how to integrate robotics into their warehouse today, with the plethora of options and choices and challenges that they have? Getting started is hard. What would you recommend?
I think it's about understanding the pain points in the current operation. Where is it not working? Where is it insanely difficult? Where is it costing far more than your benchmark should be allocating to that? And really, that will help you understand where can you get the most benefit? Where will it actually be meaningful? Because, we talk about technology, any sort of technology, right, all of the time. And it's very easy to be able to do something technically, but doesn't mean that actually you should do something. And I think as an industry, we're in real danger of just, let's put a robot in to do that and put a robot in to do that. And actually, is that the best option? So really understanding, where are the pain points? Where is that opportunity? And, you can get these solutions up and running pretty quickly, certainly compared to a few years ago. And that's exciting, because if you have a pain point, you're thinking about peak 2024. Actually, it seems crazy, but there would be time today to say, let's fix this and have something up and running within this year.
Yeah, 100%, Oliver. I think first of all, these are just tools. These are still tools, right? And it's not a panacea. And to Oliver's point, you got to start with figuring out those pain points. So I'll give sort of I don't know if it's a funny anecdote, but it's an anecdote. So I worked at Six River. Right now, they're part of Ocado. I literally had some accounts that told us, we want a robot. And Oliver, to your point, we're like, well, why do you want a robot? What is the pain point you're trying to solve? What is the issue you have? And we literally had some people that said, well, I just want a robot in my warehouse because then when I bring people through, I can show them how cool I am and I have a robot. Wrong reason to buy a robot. But we certainly see that. And I think it's hard because, as Oliver said, I can literally probably tell you there's a robotic vendor. You can show me any use case within a warehouse or even potentially in a store or delivery, and I can show you at least one or two robotic vendor solutions that you could deploy. But is it the right decision? The chart we showed is only a fraction of the robotic vendors that are out there. I mean, my last report I saw, there's something close to 630 robotic OEMs out there just for the warehouse. So you can just imagine that there is a plethora, there is a massive amount of choice. But to Oliver's point, it's like, guys and gals, you don't just need to put a robot in for the sake of it because maybe the ROI is not there. Maybe it's not the right use case. Maybe the change management within your warehouse will be too disruptive. So I think it's, a retailer, where do you start? You got to look at your whole system. You got to look at your warehouse, right? Start looking at what are the issues you have. Is it you're not getting orders out quickly enough? Are your orders not being done properly, right? Are you getting 80% accuracy on your order rate coming out of your warehouse? Are you having too much inventory sitting at the loading dock because at receiving, you're just not able to put it away? Really break it down to what are the use cases that are causing you the biggest pain, but also the ones that have the biggest impact on your overall business. Because, for example, one of the cases I see sometimes is every warehouse has dunnage, right? They've got broken down boxes and cardboard they got to throw away. Well, there's a use case for a robot that helps you remove dunnage on a regular basis. That might not be core to your business, but you know what? Maybe it's something that you can employ within your warehouse because now it's going to free up an FTE to do something else, which is more core to your business. So there are ways of looking at this. And to Oliver's point, it's really to understand and to decouple what is it that you're trying to do with your warehouse? What are you trying to do down the road with your warehouse? And then what are the areas where adopting a robotic solution is going to help you? And I would caution this for retailers too, is you really do need to have, and I know it sounds like a cliche, you need to have a long-term view. And why is that? Because certain investments you might make today might keep you in a place, so to speak, for the next 10, 15 years, right? If you invest in some automation solutions that are fixed automation, you better be confident that's the one you're going to use for the next 5, 10 years because you can't just remove them willy-nilly. But it really is about that long-term view, understanding what the purpose is of your warehouse, understanding the pain points, and understanding the use cases that are going to drive your business to the next level, and then starting to look at what are the automation solutions that can fit that.
Right. And sometimes it helps to start with an incremental step rather than a full-on step in store. For example, self-checkout is great, but it really works best when it is a joint effort between a staff person and the self-checkout. You optimize the process, the queues move faster, the errors go down, the theft goes down, but you can get people through much quicker than a full service checkout. So that incremental step before you go full on robot is sometimes a smarter move in the short term, at least.
You're spot on there, Deanne. It's really about learning, right, along the way. In your self-checkout example, you learn, you see what works, you adjust, right? It's agile in its purest sense, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, and expanding on your point there, Oliver, moving from managing products at the warehouse level to moving those products out to get them in the hands of customers or on shelves in stores. What do you see as some of the relevant technologies out there for moving products? I mean, have they evolved or improved recently in a meaningful way?
So I think probably the biggest evolution has actually been in customer acceptance, right? Humans, us, consumers, have started to engage more and more with robots, whether it be in stores, whether it be outside in the world, or even at home, of course. The rise in robotic vacuum cleaners, robotic lawnmowers, all of these different products, I suppose, expose us as people to the idea of a robot is able to walk around, it's able to avoid the table leg or my foot or whatever that is, right? And I think as you start to get more and more of this acceptance coming around, the opportunity for deploying robots expands. And actually, as you look at some of the different examples and tests and trials that we've seen, for example, using robots in store, the customers in that store get really quite attached, quite involved with the robot in terms of, I enjoy seeing the robot. We've had robots dressed up for Christmas time with a bit of tinsel and decorations on. We've got, I've seen people helping robots that have managed to get stuck perhaps in the snow, or they've run into some sort of obstacle, and actually people that are completely disconnected feel some compassion to this machine, which is a really interesting psychological challenge. And I'm sure we could dive into that much more. But I think that has been a huge opportunity and a huge development for this whole space.
I absolutely love that. I know that's been a big challenge for bringing robotics into the store more deeply. Retailers have tried putting googly eyes on them or decorating them to try to make them dance and tell jokes to be a little bit more human and avoid being creepy or off-putting. We want more Rosie the Robot and less Terminator, right? But the challenge around that has been unpredictability, the unpredictability of humans as they move through these tight, narrow aisles. There's a shopping cart in the way. There's a box sitting on the ground temporarily until the product can be put on the shelf. And the time that it takes for a robot to adapt and learn in that environment has been a little bit clumsy and slow in the past. I think robots until now have really relied on something called reinforcement learning, which is a combination of somebody back in head office receiving information from the robot, writing code by hand, and leveraging a program of learning techniques that have been embedded into the robot. And this is slow, and there's back and forth time, and it limits robots' ability to adapt in a time frame that is meaningful in any way. But AI has really been a game changer in allowing that to progress. We now have something called rapid motor adaptation, RMA, and it's really letting AI take over some of that coding work that humans used to do. And so now you have an AI receiving information in real time from the robot. Oh, I've had a question from a human. I have a box in the way. I have something that I have to navigate around, and the information goes to the AI. The AI can immediately update the robot's code and send it back. And in the process of that real-time back and forth interaction, learning is happening in again, real time and very quickly. And so now it sounds a lot like the awakening of Skynet, and it can be scary if you think about it too much. But it's really letting AI and the robot interact together to learn and solve these problems. So robots are now able to engage with humans with very responsive, almost empathetic interactions, and read human emotions and have an engagement with a human that is memorable and meaningful, in addition to being highly personalized and specific. All the benefits of the ability of AI and the robot, and all of the humanity that a typical staff person can have. So they're starting to meet in the middle and really provide a benefit to the customer in a physical store.
Well, let me ask you guys this, because both of you obviously looked at robots in the wild, but I'm going to roll my eyes when it says, but do you also think the adoption will become more apparent because of the Gen X or the Gen Z, whatever, millennials that were coming up they're already used, they're all living on their phones. They all are used to everything that's digital. We're seeing robots, obviously, in college campuses delivering. They're probably used to it. Do you think part of it is as the population that ages out, the younger generation comes up, they're going to be like, of course we want robots. We're so used to them. We've seen the Roomba since I was 0 years old, right? I'm used to that.
Absolutely. And I think, to your point, Guy, it is the removal of fear. You don't fear something that you've grown up with. And so they don't have that resistance to it. And they have an innate understanding or expectation, I'll say, that the robot's going to do what it's told to do. And there is a huge element of blind faith that the younger generation has in technology, that it will work, that it will protect them, that it will not do something wrong. I don't, I think older people we all tend to be a little jaded and skeptical about things like that. And the younger people just don't have that, or they know it and they don't care.
Absolutely. I think we see that all around us all the time. I'm sure we can all reflect on a time where perhaps we've seen a child looking at a screen, trying to tap it, thinking it's a touch screen. And of course it's not, it's just a screen, right? But they don't, to your point, they don't know any different. And I think as you look at the younger generations, look at the university and college students that have got robots trundling around, they are being served by, robotic vending machines, essentially, and some of their locations. That's gonna work its way into their experience as a norm, so that when they leave the college or the university and they go, what do you mean I can't get a robotic delivery? Why not? I want it, and I want it in the next half an hour. What do you mean there isn't a robot? You'd be like, what? And I think as we start to think about that, right? So I think that's going to be a big driving force. And we are, for a number of different universities, and there are a number of reasons why universities are, in a way, a perfect testing ground for this technology. But it is training the future consumer base. So, yes, exciting time.
Yeah. Well, and that's a good point to kind of pivot a little to talk about something that's very important, and that is ethics in robots. And I wonder if the two of you are seeing ethical considerations that need to be addressed with increasing the interaction between humans and robots, either between staff or between customers.
Yeah, I'll take that to start. It's a tough one in the standpoint of, you're absolutely right, Dan, and I think all of you touched upon this, and I'm sure you'll expand on it. These are massive data hogs. They're consuming a tremendous amount of data. They're also producing a tremendous amount of data. What do we do with that? What's the ethics of that data, that information? I'll freely admit, one of the things I've done some studying and thought about is, you think about some of these robotic vendors that are coming from countries that might not have as much care, if you will, for our data. What do you do about that? Because now we're putting those robots in sometimes potentially very sensitive areas. We're putting robots in hospitals. We're putting robots in areas where I want it to be efficient, I want it to serve, but what kind of data is it pulling? What kind of data and information is it gathering itself? And how do I ensure, to your point, Dan, for the ethics of it, I protect that data and I abide by those rules? I think there's also the notion of, and this, I think definitely all of our stuff that you covered around, driverless vehicles. And I know this is a whole slippery slope, but it's, how do we understand that a driverless core, what are the rules it has, in terms of it engaging with us, the people? I think I just saw recently, like, there was a Tesla car that caught on fire somewhere and all kinds of issues. And so I think, I think, Dan, we're going to have, just like AI, just like big data, just like when we started doing e-commerce and I was sharing my information on the internet and people have access to it. We have to take that in consideration. And I think retailers that are going to lean on robotics will need to take that into consideration with their decision making. And I think they're going to need to have some contingency plans about things such as, hey, this robot, a bunch of data, it got hacked into, or I have a delivery robot, and yes, it has 4D cameras and LiDAR and all kinds of safety, but it ran into grandma going down the sidewalk. That's not good. What do I do about that? So yes, I think we have to look at this just like we do with any other technology that collects or uses our data to better serve us. What are the ethics behind it? What are the rules? What are the regulations? How do we govern this? And how do we enforce the rules? And I think that's that's kind of the dark side that I don't think we really spend enough time thinking about because it's hard. And I don't know if there's an easy solution, but you're absolutely right. We're going to have to consider this as we move forward and adopt more of these technological tools.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think to illustrate how far we've got to come, let's just think as a consumer, let's just think about an e-commerce shopping experience. You go on, one of the first things that happens is you get the pop-up. Are you going to accept the cookies or do you want to be able to reject them, right? And you can go on and you can say what you want to have, what you don't want to have. It's your choice. You are in control as the consumer and the owner of your data. Now transfer that into let's say a physical retail environment, and you are coming face to face with a robot that's packed with cameras, that is watching you shopping, perhaps engaging with you directly. Do we opt out of cookies or equivalent tracking data there? How does that work? Are you going to have I've entered the store and would I like to accept the cookies? That's going to be the pain, right?
Talk about friction point.
Depends on what kind of cookies.
Yeah,
Good cookies,
yeah,
yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think the other factor to consider around that data is actually we're laying on quite a complex network of different parties involved in these decisions in terms of handling the data, processing the data, particularly as you get into sort of this multi-complex vendor situations, as we were talking about earlier on.
Yeah, and for me, I think it's transparency. Corporate transparency is even more important. There was a recent case of a car running over a self-driving car, running over a human being. What came out eventually is that it was another human driver that caused that accident. It created a situation that the self-driving car couldn't react to fast enough. The self-driving car, in an attempt to correct itself, followed its programming and drove over the victim a couple of times, trying to get out of the situation. And that is bad. But the ethics of the real ethical problem was that the self-driving car's company didn't report all of that. They didn't really fess up to the fact that their programming malfunctioned, that things didn't work well, that the human victim got driven over a couple of times. That transparency and full acknowledgement and acceptance of what's happening and a clear understanding of accountability, that really needs to be amped up if you're going to get into a more technology-first solution like robotics.
It's a fascinating point, and I think there's a huge amount of sensitivity around this topic. Thinking about accidents, thinking about an autonomous pod that is going down the sidewalk and hits someone. That is going to be newsworthy, right? That's a PR nightmare waiting to happen. But actually, what's quite interesting is how many times has a person walked down a sidewalk and bumped into someone and we don't even notice, right? Exactly. So I think that there is this sort of almost hyped up attention on robotics, and it's a bit of a tinderbox. We could very easily blow things out of proportion relative to what we as humans do already.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the part that's and I think, Dan, to your point, right, the ethics of the companies themselves being transparent about this, because it's going to come out anyways, right? Just like you tell your kid, like, did you break the vase? No. Well, we're going to find out eventually, and eventually you find out that they did it. It's the same thing, but you're right too, Oliver. I think there's this overblown magnification of it, which I get because we think of Skynet. We've seen all the. I just watched a Black Mirror episode recently. I forget, it was Heavy Metal or something, where it's basically the Boston Dynamic dog that basically goes rogue, and it's like, oh my goodness, like what if this really happens? But I think robotics companies, whether they're in the warehouse, whether they're doing last mile delivery, whether they're helping us within the store, are going to have to be as transparent as possible, because they're going to have to ease and assuage our fears of the common person who's not in technology, because otherwise the adoption will never happen. And I think that's the big challenge, right? They don't want to your point, Dan, they don't want to talk about, hey, this car tragically ran over this person, but that's because the program didn't know what to do. And then, okay, like rationally you can think about it and understand it, but I think emotionally it really pulls at us, which we understand. And to your point, Oliver, there are how many car accidents a day, unfortunately, where people die, but we don't talk about it because we know every time we as humans get in a car, we take that risk and we accept it. But if the autonomous car does it, oh my goodness, it's, and we never talk about the miles and miles the autonomous vehicle drove where there were no accidents, right? So I think it's going to be a real big issue. And again, I think for retailers, they need to make that decision. They need to think about that when they make those decisions themselves. Because at the end of the day, if I'm big brand retailer X, Y, or Z, and I invest in this technology and something happens, what is the blowback on me, and how do I handle it? How do I deal with it? How do I manage it? How do I ensure that it is taken care of properly? And I think that's something that all retailers, when they make these decisions, these investments, they absolutely, to your point, Dan, have to think about that aspect.
Well, and just kind of to wrap this up too, that's a great point. Where do you gentlemen see the future of robotics in retail going? And what are some of the things that you're more excited about?
So I'll start with this because I'll start back at the warehouse again, right? I think we're going to continue to see an adoption of automation within the warehouse for retail. I think retail must or needs to have the flexibility, the capacity enabled by robotics. What I look forward, and I'm going to bleed over into what Oliver wrote about and some of what you did too, Deanne, and what you asked about earlier. What I'm excited about with robotics and retail is how do we now start tying in everything from the picking in the warehouse to the in-store experience to the last mile fulfillment and even maybe returns, and how or the opportunity that robotics has to physically tie all this in together, right? I think the advent of the internet and e-commerce, we saw the ability now digitally to tie in the consumer experience, right? Consumers, we knew where you were all the time, and through the digital medium, we were able to do this. I look at it from the robotics side. Now we're adding the physical layer, right? How do I truly give the customer potentially a true, full 360 experience and understanding, hey, the robot's picking my order over here, and this robot's going to pick it up and deliver it to my house. And oh, by the way, I'm going to be out of my house and be down on my the neighbor's house 2 doors down, but you can just pick up my signal on my phone and then send the robot there and truly have this merger of a digital and physical experience. I think it's still a long ways off, but that's what I look forward to.
Oliver, what about you?
For me, I think we're only going to start to see more and more robotics as, all the things we've spoken about, the technology develops, the acceptance develops, and the capabilities develop as well. However, I think there are so many considerations that we've just not had time to touch on today. Everything from maintenance through to sustainability. How do we avoid creating sort of future legacy robotics challenges for ourselves? So many and many, many, many more. And I think with all of those considered, we've just got to start having so many more conversations, much deeper conversations about this. It's not just about, let's say, the productivity saving, but actually, how does this really fit into our operating model, our business model, our customer proposition? And so I think it's a fascinating time, and let's expect to be talking about it a huge amount more going forward.
And for me, I'm excited about the smoothing out of the customer experience in the retail store, the small myriad little friction points that come up every time a consumer walks through a store. I have been doing some house renovations and going to Home Depot. I needed a specific part. It wasn't on the shelf. I asked the staff person. She pulled up her little handheld device and said we should have 2. Well, the 2 weren't there. So robots could make sure that the inventory is accurate and it's in the right location. Finding the product, she wasn't fully trained. She didn't know exactly where this obscure little piece for grouting was kept in the store. So we wandered around a little bit. A robot would have taken me straight to that. And a robot I had questions she couldn't answer about sanded or unsanded grout. Robot could have given me the information on that instantly. And could even have checked me out right there in the aisle, so I didn't have to spend time at the front checkout. I could have just gotten my stuff, paid for it, and left. So all of those things really, I think, are going to level up the retail store game, which is really where 70% of transactions are still happening and are driving the highest profit margins, and keeping the return levels at a low. So making that experience stellar is really going to be a game changer for retailers. So I think we have used up all of our time. I know I love this subject. I have loved the time that we've spent talking about it. I could sit and listen to the two of you forever. But all good things must come to an end. So on behalf of Rethink Retail, I'd like to thank all of you for participating, and for everyone who's watching. If you want to read this report, it's an extremely interesting, well-written report. Not to blow my own horn, but and we have a list of retailers or companies, I guess, who provide services in the chart that we pulled up in the beginning. It is, as Oliver had said, by no means a comprehensive, complete list. And so if there are people who do want to get in touch with us and talk about their services and engage with us further, we encourage you to seek us out on LinkedIn and connect with us and connect with Rethink Retail. Thank you.